The wine glass slipped from my trembling fingers as I watched my father casually sign my name on the bank transfer form, draining my entire life savings of $47,000. My mother held the laptop steady, both of them acting like this was perfectly normal dinner conversation. 26 years of trust shattered in that moment as I realized they had been practicing my signature for months. The worst part, they smiled at me afterward and asked if I wanted dessert. But before we dive into how my own parents became my biggest enemies, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and if you've ever had family betray you in ways you never imagined possible, hit that like button because this story gets absolutely wild. Don't forget to subscribe because family revenge stories like this one will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about blood loyalty. My name is Savannah Blake, and until that devastating dinner, I thought I had won the family lottery. Growing up in suburban Denver, I was the golden child who never questioned why good things happened to me so easily. My parents, Robert and Linda Blake, seemed like the supportive dream team every kid wishes for. I graduated summa cum laude from business school, landed a corporate consulting job straight out of college, and had been diligently saving every penny for the past 4 years. While my friends blew their paychecks on weekend trips and designer clothes, I lived like a monk, eating ramen and shopping at thrift stores. My goal was simple: save enough money to start my own consulting firm by age 30. My parents always praised my financial discipline. Dad would brag to his golf buddies about his responsible daughter who never asked for handouts. Mom would tell her book club how proud she was that I learned the value of hard work. They seemed genuinely invested in my success, always asking about my savings goals and celebrating each milestone with me. The first red flag should have been how interested they became in my banking habits around 6 months ago. Dad started asking specific questions about my accounts, which bank I used, whether I had online access set up. When I mentioned switching to a new credit union that offered better interest rates, Mom immediately wanted to know all the details about the transfer process. I thought they were just being supportive parents, maybe even considering switching banks themselves. Dad had always been meticulous about finances, and Mom was constantly looking for ways to optimize their retirement savings. Their sudden interest seemed like natural curiosity from two people who had successfully managed money their entire marriage. The second red flag was how they insisted on having our monthly family dinner at their house that particular Sunday instead of our usual restaurant. Mom claimed she wanted to cook my favorite meal, but looking back, I realized they needed the privacy and comfort of their own space for what they were planning. When I arrived at their house that evening, everything seemed normal. The dining room was set with Mom's good china, and the smell of pot roast filled the air. Dad was in his usual spot at the head of the table, reading financial news on his tablet. Mom bustled around the kitchen, chatting about neighborhood gossip and asking about my work projects. We ate dinner like we had hundreds of times before, discussing my job, their retirement plans, and family updates. I told them about a potential promotion opportunity that had come up at work, and they seemed thrilled. Dad even suggested we should celebrate with a nice bottle of wine, which he retrieved from their basement collection. After dinner, as Mom cleared the dishes, Dad mentioned he had been researching investment opportunities and wanted to show me something interesting on his laptop. This was not unusual. He often shared financial articles or investment strategies he thought might benefit me. I settled into the living room couch, wine glass in hand, expecting another lecture about index funds or retirement planning. Instead, he opened a banking website that looked eerily familiar. My stomach dropped when I realized it was my credit union's login page, and somehow he was accessing my account. The numbers on the screen showed my complete financial picture: my checking account with $3,000, my savings account with $44,000, and my investment account with another few thousand. Before I could process what was happening, he navigated to the transfer section and began filling out a form to move money from my savings to an external account I did not recognize. My brain struggled to catch up with what my eyes were seeing. This was my money, my account, and somehow my father was controlling it like it belonged to him. When he reached the signature section, he pulled out a piece of paper covered with handwriting practice. I watched in horror as he had been practicing my signature over and over again, dozens of attempts to perfectly replicate my name. The paper was filled with Savannah Blake, written in slightly different styles, each one getting closer to my actual signature. Mom appeared beside him with a pen, and together they executed the final step. Dad signed my name with the practiced precision of someone who had been preparing for this moment for months. The electronic signature looked perfect, identical to how I would sign my own name. $47,000 disappeared from my accounts with a few clicks and a forged signature. The wine glass slipped from my numb fingers, shattering on their hardwood floor as the reality hit me. My own parents had been planning this theft for months. They had studied my banking habits, learned my account information, practiced my signature, and chosen this family dinner as the perfect moment to rob me blind. The worst part was not just the money, though. Losing 4 years of savings felt like a physical blow. The worst part was how casual they were about it, how they continued to act like loving parents, even as they destroyed my financial future. Dad looked up from the laptop and asked if I was okay, as if I had simply dropped a glass by accident rather than witness my own family commit fraud against me. Mom started cleaning up the broken glass, chatting about how we should be more careful with the good wine glasses. Neither of them acknowledged what had just happened. Neither offered any explanation for why they had just stolen my life savings. They acted like this was completely normal, like parents helping themselves to their adult child's money was just another family tradition. I sat frozen on their couch, my mind racing to understand how the two people who raised me, who taught me about honesty and integrity, could so calmly betray every value they claimed to hold dear. This was not a moment of desperation or a misguided attempt to help me. This was premeditated theft executed with the cold precision of professional criminals. The drive home from my parents' house felt like an out-of-body experience. My hands shook as I gripped the steering wheel, my mind cycling between disbelief and rage. Every few minutes, I would convince myself that what I witnessed could not have been real, then remember the practiced signatures and my father's steady hand as he transferred my money to an unknown account. I pulled into my apartment complex parking lot and immediately called my credit union's emergency hotline. The customer service representative listened patiently as I explained that my parents had somehow accessed my account and transferred money without my permission. Her response crushed any hope I had for a quick resolution. According to their records, the transfer appeared completely legitimate. The signature matched their files perfectly, and the transaction originated from my registered IP address during normal business hours. Since the money went to an account with my father's name on it, and since I was listed as an authorized user who had previously given him access for emergency purposes, the bank considered this a family financial arrangement rather than theft. I stared at my phone in horror as she explained that I had apparently signed documents months ago authorizing my father to access my accounts if needed. I had no memory of signing any such documents, but the bank had copies of forms with my signature granting him power of attorney over my finances during emergencies. That night I barely slept as the full scope of their planning became clear. They had not just forged one signature. They had been systematically documenting fake authorizations for months. Every time I visited their house, every family gathering, every casual dinner had been an opportunity for them to gather information and forge documents that would make their theft appear legal. The next morning, I drove straight to a lawyer's office. Patricia Morrison, a family law attorney with 23 years of experience, listened to my story with the weary expression of someone who had heard similar tales before. Her first question was not about the money, but about whether I had any proof that the signatures were forged. The problem was obvious immediately. Proving that my own parents had been practicing my signature would require evidence I did not have. I had not taken photos of the practice paper, had not recorded our conversation, and had not saved any documentation of their confession. From a legal standpoint, I was an adult child accusing my parents of stealing money they apparently had legal access to. Patricia explained the brutal reality of family financial fraud. Unless I could prove the signatures were forged and that I never authorized their access to my accounts, the police would treat this as a civil family dispute rather than criminal theft. Even if I could prove fraud, prosecuting my own parents would require me to testify against them in court, knowing that conviction could result in prison time for both of them. But Patricia also gave me hope. She explained that financial fraud leaves digital footprints, and if my parents had been planning this for months, they had likely made mistakes that could be documented and exposed. She recommended I hire a private investigator to help build a case before involving law enforcement. The private investigator, Marcus Webb, was a former police detective who specialized in family fraud cases. Within 48 hours of hiring him, he had uncovered the first piece of crucial evidence. My parents had opened the receiving account just 6 weeks earlier using forged documents that listed me as a co-owner. The account was designed to look like a joint family investment fund, but I had never signed any papers or provided identification for its creation. Marcus also discovered that my parents had been researching my banking information through illegal means. They had used my social security number to request account statements and had called my credit union multiple times impersonating me to gather information about transfer procedures and signature requirements. The investigation revealed an even more disturbing pattern. My parents were not struggling financially. Their retirement accounts were healthy, and they owned their house outright. This was not desperate people making a bad decision. This was calculated theft motivated by something more sinister than financial need. Marcus found evidence that they had been planning to use my money to fund a business investment with my uncle, my father's brother, who lived in Arizona. The plan was to buy and renovate rental properties, using my savings as their initial capital while keeping me completely unaware of how my money was being used. Most shocking was the discovery that this was not their first time stealing from family. Marcus uncovered court records showing that my father had been involved in a lawsuit with his own sister 15 years earlier over similar issues involving their mother's estate. The case had been settled out of court, but the allegations painted a picture of someone with a long history of financial manipulation within his own family. Armed with this information, I began developing a strategy that went beyond simply recovering my money. My parents had not just stolen from me. They had violated every principle of trust and family loyalty that supposedly defined our relationship. They deserved consequences that matched the magnitude of their betrayal. The first step was protecting my remaining assets. I closed all my existing accounts and opened new ones at a different bank using a post office box address they did not know about. I changed all my passwords, set up fraud alerts on my credit reports, and established new security questions they could not possibly answer. The second step was gathering more evidence. I started recording every conversation with my parents, documenting their attempts to explain away the missing money or justify their actions. I also began researching their financial activities, looking for other instances of suspicious behavior that could strengthen my case. Marcus advised me to continue acting normal around my parents while building our evidence file. This meant attending family dinners, answering their phone calls, and pretending I was not actively working to expose their crimes. It was psychologically exhausting to smile and make small talk with people who had betrayed me so completely, but it was necessary to prevent them from destroying evidence or fleeing. The hardest part was managing my own emotional state. The anger was overwhelming at times, threatening to consume every other aspect of my life. I had trusted these people completely, had shared my dreams and fears with them, had sought their advice on major life decisions. Now I knew that every supportive conversation, every proud moment they had shared in my achievements, had been tainted by their secret plans to rob me. But anger, I realized, could be a powerful motivator when channeled properly. Instead of letting it destroy me, I used it to fuel my determination to see justice done. My parents thought they were dealing with their naive daughter who would accept their betrayal quietly. They were about to discover they had seriously underestimated the woman they had raised. 3 weeks into my investigation, I discovered something that changed everything. While researching my parents' recent financial activities, Marcus found evidence that I was not their only victim. My cousin Jessica, my father's brother's daughter, had mysteriously lost access to her college fund 2 years ago. The money had disappeared just before her senior year, forcing her to take out massive student loans to finish her degree. Jessica lived in Phoenix, working 2 jobs to pay off debt that should never have existed. When I called her, the conversation started awkwardly since we had not spoken in years, but her reaction to my questions about her missing college fund was immediate and emotional. She had always suspected our fathers were involved in the disappearance of her money, but had never been able to prove it. Her story was eerily similar to mine. Her father and mine had approached her about temporarily borrowing her college fund for a business opportunity, promising to return the money with interest before her final semester. They had convinced her that traditional savings accounts were earning almost nothing, while their real estate investment could double her money in just 6 months. Jessica had been reluctant, but the pressure from both fathers wore her down. They made her feel selfish for not trusting family, guilty for not supporting their entrepreneurial dreams. She eventually signed papers she did not fully understand, believing she was entering into a legitimate business partnership with her own family. The money disappeared into the same type of account Marcus had discovered in my case. When Jessica tried to withdraw her funds for tuition, she discovered the account had been closed and the money transferred to investments she had never approved. Her father claimed the real estate deal had gone bad, that they had lost everything, and that he would pay her back as soon as possible. That promise was never kept. Jessica's father declared bankruptcy 6 months later, claiming he could not repay her money due to failed business ventures. Meanwhile, both our fathers had purchased new cars and taken expensive vacations, showing no signs of the financial distress they claimed had cost Jessica her college fund. Marcus connected Jessica with the same attorney who was handling my case. Patricia Morrison was fascinated by the pattern emerging between our cases and agreed to represent Jessica pro bono if she was willing to testify in my case. The evidence from both situations would create a much stronger argument for systematic fraud rather than isolated family disputes. But we needed more evidence, and we needed it before my parents realized they were being investigated. Marcus suggested we set up a controlled meeting where I could get them to admit their actions on camera. The plan was risky, but it was our best chance to get the confession we needed for criminal charges. I invited my parents to lunch at a busy restaurant, choosing a public place where they would feel safe speaking freely while I secretly recorded our conversation. I had spent days rehearsing how to bring up the missing money without seeming accusatory, hoping they would explain their actions in their own words. The conversation started with normal small talk about work and weather, but I gradually steered it toward my finances. I mentioned that I was having trouble with my bank statements, that there seemed to be some confusion about recent transactions. My parents exchanged quick glances, a micro-expression that confirmed their guilt even before they spoke. Dad's explanation was a masterpiece of manipulation. He claimed that I had asked him to help manage my money months ago, that I had been concerned about making poor financial decisions on my own. According to his version of events, transferring my savings was my idea designed to protect me from my own impulsive spending habits. Mom supported his story with details I knew were false. She claimed I had complained about feeling overwhelmed by financial responsibilities, that I had specifically requested their help in managing my accounts. She even suggested that I might be having memory problems, that the stress of work was affecting my ability to remember our conversations clearly. Their gaslighting was so smooth, so practiced, that I almost started doubting my own memories. If I had not been recording the conversation, if I had not already gathered evidence of their fraud, I might have believed their version of events. They were that convincing in their lies, that skilled at rewriting history to make themselves the heroes of their own story. But they made one crucial mistake during that lunch. Dad mentioned specific details about their real estate investment that he could not have known unless he was actively involved in spending my money. He described property locations, renovation costs, and profit projections with the enthusiasm of someone personally invested in the outcome. When I pressed him about how he knew so much about investments made with my money, he realized his error. His face changed, the mask of concerned father slipping for just a moment to reveal the calculating businessman underneath. He tried to backtrack to claim he was just sharing general real estate knowledge, but the damage was done. That recording became the centerpiece of our criminal case. Combined with the financial evidence Marcus had gathered and Jessica's testimony about similar fraud, we finally had enough proof to convince law enforcement that this was not a family dispute, but systematic criminal behavior. The district attorney, Maria Santos, was initially hesitant to prosecute what appeared to be a family financial disagreement. But when she reviewed our complete evidence file, including the forged documents, the illegal account access, and the pattern of behavior across multiple victims, she agreed that criminal charges were appropriate. Marcus also uncovered evidence that my parents had been researching bankruptcy law, apparently planning to declare insolvency if anyone questioned their use of stolen money. They had already moved assets into my mother's name, only attempting to protect their house and retirement accounts from potential lawsuits. The investigation revealed that their real estate investment had actually been successful, generating exactly the profits they had promised Jessica years earlier. They owned 3 rental properties in Arizona, purchased entirely with money stolen from their own family members. The properties were generating monthly rental income that they had never shared with their victims. Most infuriating was the discovery that they could have easily afforded their real estate investments without stealing from us. Their financial records showed healthy retirement accounts, significant savings, and minimal debt. They had not stolen our money out of necessity. They had stolen it because they believed they were entitled to use their children's assets for their own benefit. As we prepared for criminal charges, I struggled with the emotional weight of prosecuting my own parents. Patricia warned me that family fraud cases often fell apart when victims backed down at the last minute, unable to follow through with sending their own relatives to prison. But Jessica's support made all the difference. She had been carrying the burden of her stolen college fund for 2 years, watching our fathers prosper while she struggled with debt that should never have existed. Her determination to see justice done strengthened my own resolve to see this through to the end. We also discovered that there might be other victims. Marcus found evidence suggesting that my parents had borrowed money from elderly relatives with promises to repay that were never honored. The scope of their financial manipulation within our extended family was larger than we had initially realized. The decision to press criminal charges was made easier by my parents' complete lack of remorse. Even after being confronted with evidence of their fraud, they continued to insist they had done nothing wrong. They claimed they were helping their children make better financial decisions, that we should be grateful for their intervention rather than angry about their theft. Their arrogance convinced me that criminal prosecution was the only way to stop them from victimizing other family members. They needed to face real consequences for their actions, consequences severe enough to prevent them from continuing their pattern of financial abuse. As we moved forward with criminal charges, I knew there was no going back. Once I testified against my parents in court, our family relationships would be permanently destroyed. But those relationships had been built on lies and manipulation anyway. It was time to discover what justice looked like when family loyalty was no longer more important than accountability. The day criminal charges were filed against my parents, I felt a mixture of terror and relief that I had never experienced before. District Attorney Maria Santos held a press conference announcing the indictment on multiple counts of fraud, forgery, and elder abuse. Yes, elder abuse, because Marcus had uncovered evidence that my great-aunt Helen, my grandmother's sister, had also been victimized by their schemes. Helen was 84 years old and living in a nursing home when my parents convinced her to sign over power of attorney for her finances. They told her it was temporary, just until she recovered from hip surgery and could manage her accounts again. Instead, they systematically drained her retirement savings over 18 months, leaving her unable to afford the private care facility she had paid into for decades. The nursing home administrator had tried to contact Helen's family when her payments stopped arriving, but my parents intercepted those calls. They told the facility that Helen's money was tied up in probate issues and convinced them to accept delayed payments while they continued stealing from her accounts. Helen had been moved to a state-funded facility with substandard care because she could no longer afford her original nursing home. When social services investigated her sudden financial distress, my parents provided forged documents showing that Helen had gifted them her money voluntarily. The case was closed without further investigation because elderly financial abuse was notoriously difficult to prove. But Marcus had found the smoking gun. Hidden in my father's home office were copies of Helen's original financial statements, showing how they had tracked her assets and planned their theft months in advance. They had even researched her medication schedule to determine when she would be most confused and vulnerable to signing documents she did not understand. The elder abuse charges carried much more serious penalties than simple fraud. Maria Santos explained that targeting vulnerable elderly family members was considered one of the most heinous forms of white-collar crime. My parents were now facing potential prison sentences of 15 to 20 years each if convicted on all counts. When the local news picked up the story, I was horrified to discover that my family's criminal behavior had become public entertainment. The headlines read like something from a crime documentary: local couple accused of stealing from children and elderly aunt, and family financial fraud ring exposed by victims' investigation. My workplace became uncomfortable as colleagues whispered about my family situation. Some people were supportive, praising my courage in standing up to criminal behavior regardless of family relationships. Others seemed to judge me for turning on my own parents, as if blood relations should excuse theft and elder abuse. The social pressure was intense, but nothing compared to the harassment I received from extended family members who believed my parents' version of events. My father's sister called me screaming about how I was destroying the family over a simple misunderstanding. Cousins I barely knew left voicemails accusing me of being vindictive and ungrateful. My parents hired an expensive criminal defense attorney who immediately launched a public relations campaign designed to discredit me and Jessica. Their lawyer gave interviews suggesting we were troubled young women with substance abuse problems who were making false accusations to cover our own financial irresponsibility. The personal attacks were devastating, but they backfired spectacularly when Marcus uncovered evidence that my parents had hired a private investigator to dig up dirt on their own daughters. They had spent thousands of dollars trying to find evidence of drug use, mental illness, or criminal behavior they could use to destroy our credibility in court. Their private investigator had found nothing because there was nothing to find. Jessica and I were both responsible adults with clean records and stable employment. The only thing their investigation accomplished was providing more evidence of their consciousness of guilt and willingness to destroy their own children to escape consequences. The preliminary hearing was my first time seeing my parents since the criminal charges were filed. They sat at the defendant's table, looking like the respectable middle-class couple they had always appeared to be. Mom wore the same navy dress she had worn to my college graduation. Dad had his hair freshly cut and wore the tie I had given him for Father's Day 2 years earlier. But when they looked at me sitting in the witness section, their faces showed no recognition of the daughter they had raised. Their expressions were cold, calculating, focused entirely on their own survival rather than any concern for the pain they had caused their family. Jessica flew in from Phoenix to attend the hearing, and seeing her gave me strength I did not know I needed. She had taken vacation time from both her jobs to be there, sacrificing income she could not afford to lose because she believed in our fight for justice. The evidence presented at the preliminary hearing was overwhelming. financial records showing systematic theft from multiple victims, forged documents with practiced signatures, recorded conversations, where my parents contradicted their own defense claims and testimony from banking officials who confirmed that proper authorization procedures had never been followed. Helen's nursing home administrator testified about the impact of the financial abuse on her care and quality of life. She described how Helen had been confused and distressed when moved to the state facility, asking repeatedly about what had happened to her money and why her family had abandoned her. The most damning evidence was the timeline Marcus had constructed, showing how my parents' lifestyle had improved dramatically during the same periods when their victims' money disappeared. New cars, expensive vacations, home renovations, and investment property purchases all coincided perfectly with their theft activities. Their defense attorney tried to argue that everything had been done with proper authorization, but the prosecutor systematically dismantled those claims. The supposed authorization documents were obviously forged with signatures that varied significantly from the victims' actual writing samples. When the judge bound the case over for trial, setting bail at $50,000 each, my parents' carefully constructed facade finally cracked. Dad's face went white as he realized they might actually go to prison. Mom started crying, not the tears of someone who felt guilty about their actions, but the tears of someone who was finally facing consequences they never expected. The bail amount was calculated to ensure they could not flee, while also preventing them from accessing the stolen money they had hidden in various accounts. The judge froze all their assets pending the outcome of the trial, leaving them dependent on extended family for basic living expenses. Watching them led away in handcuffs was surreal. These were the people who had taught me to ride a bicycle, who had attended every school play and graduation ceremony, who had seemed to love and support me throughout my entire childhood. Now they were criminal defendants who had chosen greed over family loyalty. As I left the courthouse that day, I realized that my old life was completely over. The parents I thought I had never really existed. They had been masks worn by people whose true nature was finally being exposed. Everything I thought I knew about my family, my childhood, and my place in the world had been built on lies and manipulation. But for the first time since that devastating family dinner, I felt like I was winning. The truth was, coming out justice was moving forward, and the people who had betrayed my trust were finally being held accountable for their actions. The trial began 3 months after the preliminary hearing, and by then the full scope of my parents' criminal enterprise had been exposed. The prosecution had uncovered evidence of fraud dating back 12 years, affecting not just immediate family members, but also family friends, neighbors, and business associates who had trusted them with financial advice and investment opportunities. Maria Santos presented our case methodically, building a timeline that showed systematic criminal behavior rather than isolated incidents of poor judgment. She demonstrated how my parents had refined their fraud techniques over time, learning from each successful theft to improve their methods for the next victim. The evidence against them was devastating. Bank records showed money flowing from victim accounts directly into investments that benefited only my parents. Email communications revealed them discussing how to manipulate family members into signing documents they did not understand. Text messages between them showed callous disregard for the people they were stealing from. One particularly damning piece of evidence was a spreadsheet found on my father's computer that tracked potential victims and their estimated net worth. Helen's name was on that list, along with several other elderly relatives and family friends who had not yet been targeted. They had been planning future thefts while still spending money stolen from previous victims. Jessica's testimony was powerful and emotional. She described how the loss of her college fund had affected every aspect of her life, forcing her to take on crushing debt while watching our fathers live comfortable lives with money that belonged to her. She explained how the betrayal had damaged her ability to trust anyone, including other family members who might have been unaware of the theft. Helen's testimony was delivered via video link from her nursing home as she was too frail to travel to court. Despite her age and medical issues, she was lucid and articulate as she described how my parents had manipulated her during a vulnerable period following surgery. Her voice shook with anger as she explained how their theft had forced her to leave the care facility where she had been happy and move to a place where she felt abandoned and forgotten. The defense strategy was predictably desperate. Their attorney argued that my parents had been trying to help their family members make better financial decisions, that all money transfers had been authorized, and that any documentation problems were simply paperwork errors rather than criminal fraud. But that defense crumbled when the prosecution presented evidence of the fake authorization documents. Handwriting experts testified that the signatures were obviously forged with telltale signs of someone copying another person's writing rather than signing naturally. The repeated practice signatures found in my father's office made it impossible to claim the forgeries were accidental. More damaging was the evidence of premeditation. Phone records showed my parents researching their victims' financial information weeks before approaching them about money transfers. Computer forensics revealed internet searches for terms like power of attorney fraud penalties and how to avoid prosecution family theft, proving they knew their actions were criminal. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. My parents showed no emotion as the verdicts were read, sitting motionless as their criminal convictions were formally entered into the record. I felt a mixture of relief and sadness watching them accept their fate with the same cold calculation they had shown throughout their criminal activities. Sentencing was scheduled for 6 weeks later, giving the victims time to prepare impact statements describing how the crimes had affected our lives. I spent hours writing and rewriting my statement, trying to capture the full emotional devastation of being betrayed by the people I had trusted most in the world. My impact statement described not just the financial losses, but the psychological damage of discovering that my entire childhood had been influenced by people capable of such calculated cruelty. I explained how their theft had forced me to question every memory, every family tradition, every expression of love they had ever shown me. Jessica's impact statement focused on the practical consequences of their theft. She detailed how losing her college fund had affected her career prospects, her ability to buy a home, and her plans for starting a family. She described working 60-hour weeks to pay off debt that should never have existed while watching our fathers enjoy vacations funded with her stolen money. Helen's impact statement was read by her social worker as she was too upset to deliver it herself. It described the fear and confusion of being moved from familiar surroundings to an unfamiliar facility, the loss of dignity that came with receiving substandard care, and the heartbreak of feeling abandoned by family members she had trusted completely. At sentencing, my father received 14 years in federal prison, while my mother received 12 years. The judge explained that the sentences reflected not just the financial crimes, but the particular cruelty of targeting vulnerable family members who had no reason to expect such betrayal. The financial restitution ordered by the court was substantial, but mostly symbolic. My parents had already spent most of the stolen money, and their remaining assets were insufficient to fully compensate their victims. The rental properties purchased with stolen funds would be sold to partially reimburse us, but we would never recover everything they had taken. More importantly, the court ordered that my parents be permanently banned from serving as power of attorney for any family member and prohibited from accessing other people's financial accounts for any reason. They would never again be in a position to steal from vulnerable relatives. As my parents were led away to begin their prison sentences, I expected to feel satisfaction or vindication. Instead, I felt empty and exhausted. The people who had shaped my entire worldview were gone not through death or natural separation, but through their own choices to prioritize greed over family loyalty. The extended family reaction was mixed and often painful. Some relatives supported our decision to prosecute, recognizing that criminal behavior needed consequences, regardless of family relationships. Others blamed us for destroying the family, as if we had committed the crimes rather than simply refusing to cover them up. My father's sister organized a family boycott against Jessica and me, convincing several relatives to cut off all contact with us in solidarity with their imprisoned siblings. Holiday invitations stopped coming, family news was no longer shared with us, and longtime family friends began avoiding us in public. The social isolation was difficult, but it also revealed the true nature of people who thought family loyalty should excuse theft and elder abuse. We learned that some relationships were worth losing if they required us to ignore criminal behavior or pretend that blood relations justified any level of betrayal. As I processed the end of my family as I had known it, I realized that justice was not just about punishment or restitution. Justice was about truth, about refusing to live with lies, and about insisting that actions have consequences even when they come from people we love. 2 years have passed since my parents began serving their prison sentences, and I can honestly say that losing my biological family was the best thing that ever happened to me. It sounds harsh, but discovering the truth about their character freed me from relationships built on manipulation and lies, allowing me to build genuine connections with people who actually care about my well-being. Jessica and I have become closer than I ever imagined possible. What started as shared victimization has evolved into a sisterhood based on mutual respect and understanding. She moved to Denver 6 months ago, finally able to afford the relocation after receiving her portion of the restitution money from the sale of the rental properties. We spend holidays together now, creating new traditions that have nothing to do with the toxic family dynamics we grew up with. Helen recovered most of her stolen money and was able to return to her preferred nursing home. More importantly, she has regained her sense of dignity and security, knowing that the people who victimized her are behind bars. Jessica and I visit her regularly, and she has become the grandmother figure neither of us ever really had. Her stories about our grandparents help us understand that the capacity for both good and evil runs through every family line. The financial recovery was better than expected. The court-ordered sale of my parents' assets, including their house and the rental properties, generated enough money to repay about 70% of what they had stolen from all victims. My consulting business, delayed by 2 years due to their theft, finally launched last spring and is already profitable enough to support my modest lifestyle. More valuable than money, though, was the community of people who emerged to support us throughout the legal process. Patricia Morrison, our attorney, introduced us to other families who had survived financial fraud, creating a network of people who understood the unique trauma of being betrayed by trusted relatives. These connections led to genuine friendships based on shared experiences and mutual support. Marcus Webb, our private investigator, became an unexpected mentor and friend. His experience with family fraud cases helped us navigate not just the legal system, but the emotional complexity of prosecuting people we had once loved. He taught us that choosing justice over family loyalty was not betrayal but courage. The workplace support was also surprising and meaningful. My colleagues, initially awkward about my family situation, rallied around me when they understood the full scope of what had happened. Several promoted my consulting services to their networks, helping me build a client base faster than would have been possible otherwise. Professional relationships evolved into personal friendships with people who respect my integrity and determination. Dating was complicated for a while, as explaining my family situation required discussions about trust and betrayal that most people are not prepared for early in relationships. But eventually, I met David, a social worker who understands family dysfunction and appreciates partners who have done the difficult work of establishing boundaries with toxic relatives. David has his own complicated family history involving addiction and financial irresponsibility, so he understands that choosing to limit contact with biological relatives is sometimes necessary for personal well-being. Our relationship is built on honesty about our pasts and commitment to building something healthier than what either of us experienced growing up. The legal victory also opened doors I never expected. Maria Santos, the district attorney who prosecuted my parents, invited me to speak at conferences about elder financial abuse and family fraud. These speaking opportunities led to consulting work helping families navigate financial crimes and fraud investigation, turning my traumatic experience into a way to help other victims. I have testified before state legislative committees considering stronger penalties for elder abuse and family fraud. The laws in our state have been strengthened partly due to testimony from victims like Jessica, Helen, and me about the inadequacy of existing protections for vulnerable family members. The emotional healing took longer than the legal resolution, but therapy helped me process the complex grief of losing parents who were still alive. I had to mourn not just the relationship we had, but the relationship I thought we had and the family I believed I belonged to. That grief was complicated by anger, relief, and guilt about feeling better without them in my life. Prison visits were difficult at first. My parents seemed genuinely confused about why their children would not forgive them and move on from what they considered a family disagreement blown out of proportion. They showed no real understanding of how their actions had affected us, continuing to minimize their crimes and blame external circumstances for their choices. Eventually, I stopped visiting altogether. The conversations were painful and unproductive, focused entirely on their complaints about prison conditions, rather than any acknowledgement of the harm they had caused. I realized that maintaining contact was preventing my own healing rather than contributing to any genuine reconciliation. The experience taught me that family is defined by behavior rather than biology. The people who have supported me through this ordeal, who celebrate my successes and comfort me during setbacks, who respect my boundaries and value my well-being, these people are my real family, regardless of whether we share DNA or legal relationships. Jessica and I often discuss how different our lives might have been if we had never discovered the truth about our parents' criminal behavior. We might have continued being victims of their manipulation, possibly losing even more money as they refined their fraud techniques. Confronting their crimes was painful but ultimately liberating. The financial consulting business I started focuses specifically on helping families protect themselves from internal fraud and financial abuse. My experience as a victim gives me credibility with clients who might otherwise dismiss warnings about family financial manipulation. The business is growing steadily, built on referrals from satisfied clients who appreciate working with someone who understands their vulnerabilities. Looking back, I recognize that prosecuting my parents was the most difficult but most important decision I have ever made. It cost me the illusion of a loving family, but gave me the reality of authentic relationships built on respect rather than obligation. It destroyed my financial security temporarily, but ultimately led to a career that is both profitable and meaningful. The story does not have a fairy tale ending where everyone reconciles and learns to forgive each other. My parents remain in prison, serving their sentences with no apparent understanding of why their victims refuse to maintain relationships with them. Some extended family members still blame Jessica and me for destroying family unity by insisting on accountability for criminal behavior. But justice was served. Truth was revealed, and the people who chose greed over family loyalty are experiencing consequences appropriate to their actions. The victims have recovered financially and emotionally, building new lives, free from manipulation and abuse. Sometimes the best ending is not reconciliation, but liberation from toxic relationships disguised as family bonds. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and doing what was right? Have you experienced betrayal from people you trusted completely? Share your thoughts in the comments because stories like these remind us that sometimes the family we choose is healthier than the family we are born into. If this story resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming family drama and finding justice when the people closest to you become your biggest enemies. Thank you for listening to my journey from victim to survivor, and remember that choosing truth over comfort is always worth the temporary pain. Your courage to face difficult truths today creates the foundation for genuine happiness tomorrow.